Hey, it's Harry, your host. So, right now, it looks increasingly likely that the federal government could shut down again by Friday, January 30th. Shooting in Minneapolis may have all but sealed another government shutdown just days from now. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says Democrats will not move forward with a spending bill that includes DHS funding. This bill funds 78% of the government. It includes money for DHS and the Pentagon. They need 60 gays. Here's what's actually happening in plain terms. Congress is responsible for passing 12 annual spending bills to fund the federal government. So far, 6 of those bills have already passed both chambers and been signed into law. That means about half of the government is already funded and would continue operating even if there is a shutdown. The issue is with the remaining 6 bills. Those cover several major departments including Defense, Transportation, Health and Human Services, Education, Treasury, and critically the Department of Homeland Security. House Republicans bundled those 6 bills together into one package and sent it to the Senate. That package now needs 60 votes to advance. Republicans only have 53 seats, which means they need Democratic support to move it forward. After the fatal shooting in Minneapolis involving federal agents, Senate Democrats have drawn a firm line. They say they will not provide votes for any package that includes DHS funding unless it is separated out and rewritten with additional safeguards and accountability. Republican leadership has so far refused to split the bills, and that's where the shutdown risk comes in. If no agreement is reached by midnight on January 30th, funding for the agencies covered by those 6 bills would lapse. That would trigger a partial government shutdown, but still a very significant one. And it's worth slowing down here for a moment because the phrase partial shutdown can be misleading. A partial shutdown does not mean the entire federal government stops functioning overnight. Some agencies remain fully funded and continue operating as usual. Others, however, lose funding and are forced to scale back sharply or pause many of their activities. What that means in practice is that essential services continue, but the systems that support them often slow down. Processing backlogs grow. Offices operate with fewer staff, and the longer a shutdown lasts, the more noticeable those effects become. To make this more concrete, let's look at a few examples. For the IRS, core operations continue. That means tax payments are still accepted and refunds already in the system generally continue moving. But anything beyond those basic functions can slow down. That includes processing corrections, responding to notices, handling audits, and resolving issues that require human review. Even shutdowns can create delays that last well beyond the shutdown itself. Transportation is another area people tend to feel quickly. TSA agents are considered essential workers, so airport security doesn't shut down. But during extended shutdowns, staffing shortages and lower morale can lead to longer lines and more delays, especially at busy airports or during bad weather. Housing and urban development programs can also be affected. While benefits don't necessarily stop overnight, new applications, approvals, and administrative actions can slow or pause, which can be frustrating for people already waiting on decisions. Public services like national parks and certain environmental programs may shut down entirely depending on funding status, limiting access, and delaying maintenance and oversight work. So, even though some of the most visible benefits continue, a partial shutdown still ripples through daily life in very real ways. Now, this is where broader context matters. The last shutdown stretched into November and became the longest in U.S. history at 43 days. Lawmakers on both sides remember the political, economic, and logistical damage from that period. And yet, right now, the positions appear more entrenched than they were then. Democrats argue that public opinion is on their side, and that they cannot justify approving DHS funding after what they describe as repeated and serious misconduct by federal agents. Several Democratic senators who previously voted to end the last shutdown are now saying they will not budge this time. Republicans argue that defunding DHS is unacceptable, especially amid ongoing immigration enforcement and border operations. Some have warned that giving in to Democratic demands could be seen as setting a precedent or undermining enforcement priorities. So, both sides are signaling that they're prepared to absorb political fallout, even if that means a shutdown. There's also a practical timing problem that makes this harder to resolve. Winter storms have already delayed Senate business, cutting into an already narrow window for votes and negotiations. At the same time, the House is currently out on recess. That means any changes to the funding package would still need to be approved by the House before the deadline, compressing the timeline even further. In other words, there are fewer working days left than it might appear and very little margin for error. This is where the Senate math becomes important. To advance the funding package, the Senate needs 60 votes. Republicans hold 53 seats. That means at least 7 Democrats would need to support the bill for it to move forward. Democrats don't need to pass an alternative bill to block it. They simply need to withhold those votes. And right now, they're saying they will do exactly that unless DHS funding is removed from the package. That's why one unresolved issue can stall funding from multiple departments at once, and why the shutdown risk has risen so quickly. Now, let's talk about what this means for you. If a shutdown begins on January 30th, not everything stops. Social Security checks would still go out. Medicare coverage would continue. Veterans' benefits and military pay would continue because those departments are already funded. But many other services would be disrupted, especially those that rely on federal staff to process paperwork, approvals, or follow-up actions. Federal employees and affected agencies would either be furloughed or required to work without pay until funding is restored. That can slow down everything from tax correspondence to housing assistance to certain Medicare and Medicaid administrative functions. If the shutdown drags on, and that is a real concern, those disruptions tend to compound. Backlogs grow, contractors stop work, and agencies often struggle to catch up even after funding resumes. That's why preparation matters. If you're waiting on paperwork, approvals, or payments that involve a federal agency not already funded, it may be wise to expect delays. If you have travel coming up, especially flights, building extra time could help reduce stress. And if you rely on services that require direct interaction with federal offices, it's important to understand that staffing may be limited. This isn't just a short-term budget disagreement, it reflects deeper political tensions that are unlikely to resolve quickly, and that increases the risk that once a shutdown begins, it could last longer than many people expect. So, as January 30th approaches, the real question is whether lawmakers find a way to fund most of the government and fight over DHS separately, or whether this turns into another prolonged shutdown that tests how much disruption people are willing to absorb. Subscribe and like my channel. Thank you for watching.